You always think you'll go out with a plan. That you'll have your next job lined up, savings stacked, maybe even a letter printed and folded neatly in your bag. That when you finally walk away, you'll do it on your terms, calm, professional, maybe even graceful. But that's not how it happened for me. It happened in the middle of a conference room on the 12th floor of a glass building where I'd spent 4 years giving everything and getting absolutely nothing in return. I worked for a consulting firm that liked to pretend it was progressive. The kind that posted team building selfies and quoted Brené Brown in Slack messages, but still expected us to answer emails at 11 p.m. on Sundays. They called us family. But families don't measure your value by how many weekends you're willing to sacrifice. I was a senior analyst, technically. But in reality, I was part researcher, part project manager, part executive babysitter. I did the work. I cleaned the messes. I translated the partners' vague ideas into deliverables and made sure the interns didn't accidentally email the wrong version to the client. I was tired. And no one noticed. Especially not Claire, my manager. Claire had this way of pretending to lift people up while keeping her foot firmly on their back. She smiled through gritted teeth, gave credit where it wasn't due, and blamed down the chain whenever something went wrong. She knew how to perform empathy in front of clients but wielded silence like a weapon behind closed doors. I put up with it. Because rent had to be paid. Because I believed, for too long, that if I just worked harder, if I just proved myself enough times, things would change. Then came the quarterly review. A Wednesday morning. Rain outside. Gray skies. The kind of day that already feels like a warning. I sat in the corner of the glass-walled conference room, watching Claire breeze through her presentation, one I had worked on until 2 a.m. the night before. My data. My charts. My analysis. But her name was on the deck. She was talking through our client's performance metrics and upcoming strategy. Every slide was mine. Every insight, a line I'd drafted. And then, the moment. She flipped to the challenges slide. So, while our recommendations were solid, she said, with that measured corporate tone, we did encounter some setbacks due to missed deadlines in the analytics process. She didn't look at me. But she didn't have to. The implication was clear. A soft-spoken execution. A betrayal dressed in bullet points. There was no mention of the 3 back-to-back fire drills she caused by changing the scope mid-project. No note that I'd personally handled 3 teams' worth of work because she forgot to assign backup. Just a vague nod to missed deadlines. I looked around the room. No one said anything. Some nodded. Some avoided eye contact. 1 or 2 looked mildly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. That's when it hit me. I was alone. I'd been alone this whole time. My heart was pounding. I could hear the blood in my ears. I wasn't scared. I was done. I raised my hand. Claire paused. Yes, Anna? I stood. My voice was quiet, but steady. I'm not going to sit here and let that slide, I said. I've carried this team through your last 3 projects. I stayed up rewriting reports you forgot to review. I took calls on weekends while you were at brunch. And you just blamed me, in front of everyone, for problems you created. A beat of stunned silence. I won't do it anymore. Claire blinked. I think we should. I quit, I said, cutting her off. Effective immediately. You can forward my responsibilities to whoever you think actually did the work. I grabbed my notebook. My water bottle. The cardigan I always kept on the back of my chair because the office was freezing. And I walked out. Past the HR manager who looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. Past the intern whose face said everything. Wait, can people actually do that? Out the door. Into the elevator. Down 12 floors. Out into the rain. I didn't have another job lined up. I hadn't even told my friends I was thinking about leaving. But as I stepped into the street, soaked but free, I realized something. This was the first time in years I chose myself. And I wasn't going to regret it. The first thing I noticed after walking out was the silence. Not the absence of sound, the city was still its usual chaos of honking horns, sloshing puddles, and murmured phone calls, but the silence inside me. Like someone had turned off a constant buzzing I didn't even know had been humming in the background for years. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt still. Hollowed out. Like my body hadn't quite caught up with what I'd just done. I wandered for 2 hours. It wasn't planned. I just kept walking. Past the familiar cafes I used to rush by on my way to work. Past the boutique stores I used to dream of affording once I got that promotion that never came. Past the job that had, for so long, shaped my identity. Somewhere near the lake, I sat down on a bench, soaked through and shaking a little from the cold, and called my best friend, Lena. She picked up immediately. "Hey, aren't you supposed to be in that meeting?" "I walked out," I said. "I quit." A beat of silence. Then, "Wait." "What?" "I quit." I got up. In the middle of Claire's presentation. Told her I was done. And I left. Lena didn't laugh or gasp. She didn't scold me or say good for you. Instead, she said something that made my chest tighten. "It's about time." That's when the tears came. Because she was right. I had been surviving for so long that I'd forgotten what living even felt like. And somehow, someone outside of me had seen what I couldn't admit. That I'd been dying a slow death by corporate suffocation, one passive-aggressive email at a time. She talked me down gently, told me to come over, promised wine and food and a hoodie big enough to bury myself in. So I did. That night, lying on Lena's couch in my borrowed pajamas with my wet clothes in the dryer and my phone buzzing with unanswered messages from Claire, HR, and a few shocked coworkers, I stared at the ceiling and felt something dangerous. Hope. It had been a long time since I allowed myself to feel that. Of course, panic came later. Around midnight. The questions started flooding in like a dam had broken. What have I done? How am I going to pay rent? What if no one hires me again? What if I just committed career suicide in a room full of witnesses? I didn't sleep much. But in the morning, when the sun finally crept in through Lena's kitchen window, and I sipped lukewarm coffee while scrolling through job boards, something else clicked in me. Maybe this was the best thing I'd ever done. Because here's the secret no one tells you about corporate life: you're replaceable until you leave on your own terms. Then suddenly, people remember your name. They realize you were the glue. That their house of cards was built on your quiet, uncredited effort. By noon, I had 3 LinkedIn messages from former clients who had heard rumors and wanted to talk. One of them wrote, "If you're free, I'd love to bring you on as a consultant. You were the only person who ever really listened to our needs." I stared at that message for a long time. And then I smiled. Because maybe I hadn't burned the bridge. Maybe I'd just lit the path I was always meant to walk. 3 days after I quit, I woke up before my alarm out of pure habit. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't waking up to a packed Outlook calendar or a Slack message from Claire asking, "Quick favor, can you update the slides by 8?" I lay there, blinking at the ceiling, my body still wired for a routine I had no intention of continuing. Freedom is strange when you're not used to it. It feels heavy before it feels light, like stepping off a treadmill you didn't know was moving too fast. That morning, I did something radical. I made breakfast slowly. I ate it without checking my phone. I listened to music that wasn't a background noise to work. And I opened my laptop not to dive into chaos, but to look at what else was out there. The first message I replied to was from Melanie, a client I had worked with on a healthcare reform proposal 2 years ago. We'd hit it off immediately, mostly because I'd taken the time to really understand her team's chaotic data landscape, and I never tried to sell her fluff. Her message read: "Heard what happened. Can't say I'm surprised. You were always the most competent person in the room. If you're open to consulting, I have a 3-month project with flexible hours. Let's talk." I almost cried again, not from emotion, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of someone valuing me without me having to beg for it. I said yes. The consulting gig was remote, flexible, and far more respectful than anything I'd known under Claire. But even as the work picked up and the hours became steady, I struggled with something I didn't expect. The guilt of peace. I kept thinking I was missing something. That surely I'd forgotten a deliverable. That someone would pop up and say, "We need this ASAP." But the panic never came. I realized just how deep the conditioning had gone. I'd been taught that being overworked was a badge of honor. That saying yes made you valuable. That burnout was just a phase of success. But here I was getting paid more, working fewer hours, and being thanked for showing up. And I felt guilty? Lena, bless her, knocked some sense into me one night over dinner. "You know that's not normal, right?" she said, pointing a fork at me. "You being treated like a human shouldn't feel wrong. That's your nervous system unlearning trauma." I laughed. Because she was right. Again. 1 week turned into 2. 2 into a month. I was making ends meet. More than that, I was building something new. Something mine. And then, one morning, it happened. An email. From HR. From my old job. "Anna. After internal review, we acknowledge that the attribution of certain project issues during the Q2 review did not accurately reflect team contributions. While we understand you have chosen to resign, we would welcome a conversation about returning, in a revised capacity. Let us know if you're open to discussion." I stared at it. Laughed. Deleted it. They didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted me back because the machine broke when the person oiling it walked away. They thought I'd miss them. That I'd come crawling back the moment rent was due or confidence waned. But they didn't realize. Once you taste air that isn't filtered through fluorescent lighting and performative leadership, you never go back. I opened a blank document and typed. "Hi Melanie. I've been thinking about scaling up. If you know any companies that need strategic consulting, feel free to connect us. I'm building something new." And just like that, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting over. On purpose. By the second month, I wasn't just coasting. I was thriving. The consulting project with Melanie wrapped ahead of schedule, and I delivered results that impressed her entire executive board. 2 of them reached out privately asking if I was available for similar work, one in tech, one in finance. I said yes to both. Soon, I wasn't just a freelance consultant. I was the beginning of a brand. I bought a domain name, anariconsulting.com. Simple. Clean. Just me. Then came the hardest part, pricing. For years, I had been paid whatever HR decided my band level allowed. Now, I was naming my own value. And it felt terrifying. What if I charged too much and scared people off? What if I charged too little and betrayed everything I stood for? But then I remembered something Claire once said to me in passing: "The market sets your worth, Anna, not your feelings." She meant it to keep me quiet. To discourage me from asking for more. So, I flipped it. I looked at the market. And I priced myself at what people like Claire paid to people like me. And they paid. Because they weren't just buying my time, they were buying competence. Clarity. The ability to walk into chaos and leave it organized and deliverable ready. It was addicting. But not everything was smooth. There were moments of doubt. Nights when invoices took too long to be paid. Days when imposter syndrome clawed at the back of my brain, whispering things like, "What if you're just lucky? What if Claire was right and you were never leadership material?" But I had something stronger now. Clients who thanked me. Referrals that rolled in with phrases like "Anna saved us" or "We should have hired her sooner." And a schedule I controlled. I even started blocking off Fridays. Not for burnout, but for life. One Friday, I sat at a local bookstore cafe, sipping coffee and sketching out a plan to turn my consulting gigs into a scalable model, maybe even a small firm. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Anna?" I turned. It was Claire. She looked tired. Not the polished, sharp-eyed Claire from those meetings. Her hair was tied back messily, and she clutched a phone like it was a lifeline. She blinked at me. "Wow. I didn't expect, what are you doing here?" "Having a work-free Friday," I said simply, gesturing at my coffee. "You?" A pause. Her smile was forced. "Running errands." Meetings later. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she said, "I heard you're doing well." "Consulting?" I nodded. "Independent now." "It's been good." Another pause. "That day in the meeting," she said slowly, "I didn't expect you to walk out. You caught everyone off guard." "I know," I said. "That was the point." Her lips tightened. Not out of anger. More like resignation. "You were good at your job," she admitted. "I wish things had gone differently." I sipped my coffee. "Me too. But I don't." She looked confused. I smiled, not to be cruel, but to be clear. Because if they had, I wouldn't be here now. Claire nodded stiffly and muttered something about a client call. She walked away with the weight of someone who had just realized they let go of something, or someone they couldn't replace. That night, I updated my site. Added a new quote at the top. "Know your worth. Then raise it." I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living the life they said I didn't have the guts to build. And I was just getting started. A year later, I stood in front of a conference room. But this time, not as a silent contributor or shadow assistant. This time, I was the one leading the meeting. The logo on the presentation slide wasn't a company I was working for. It was mine. Reed Strategies. A boutique consultancy focused on organizational transformation, ethical leadership, and data-driven strategy. 3 buzzwords that used to mean nothing at my old job, and now formed the foundation of everything I built. I'd hired a team of 5. Not because I needed to grow fast, but because I knew exactly what kind of workplace I never wanted to create. We had flexible schedules. Monthly mental health stipends. A no-weekend email rule that was enforced with pride, not passive aggression. And everyone's contribution was named. I wasn't trying to become the next big firm. I was trying to become better. That day, I was pitching to a prospective client, a Fortune 500 company that had reached out after reading a white paper I published online titled, "Why Quiet Employees Leave Loudly." Yes, it was inspired by my story. No, I didn't name names. But everyone in the industry knew. The client nodded slowly after I finished the deck. "This is refreshing," she said. "We've worked with the big players. But no one's talked to us like this. Like we're people, not checklists." I smiled. "That's our philosophy. Strategy should serve people, not the other way around." We shook hands. A week later, they signed a 6-month contract, the biggest deal I'd ever closed. That night, I took a walk down the street near my old office building. It was late. Most of the lights were off. But the lobby still looked the same, cold, sleek, indifferent. I didn't feel anger. Or spite. Or even triumph. I felt distance. Not just in time, but in who I'd become. The version of me who sat in those meetings, quiet and overworked, hoping to be noticed, she didn't exist anymore. She'd been replaced by someone who no longer needed permission to be valued. I sat on a bench across the street and opened my phone. Dozens of emails, but I skipped to one that stood out, from a junior analyst named Brooke, someone I'd mentored briefly during my last year at the firm. Anna. I just wanted to say thank you. You probably don't remember, but you once stayed after a meeting to help me understand a report Claire said I'd ruined. I've since left the company too, and guess what? I'm starting a role in strategy next month. Seeing what you've built gave me courage. I'm rooting for you. Brooke. I stared at the message for a long time. It made me realize something. My exit wasn't just about leaving. It was about showing others what's possible. Sometimes, all it takes is one person walking out with their head high to make others realize they don't have to stay trapped. Now, when people ask me what changed everything, I don't tell them about Claire. Or the meeting. Or even the walkout. I tell them about the moment after. When I realized quitting didn't mean I'd failed. It meant I finally stopped participating in my own mistreatment. And I started writing a story that was finally mine. Not dictated. Not revised. Not credited to someone else. Mine.